Hey everybody, it's Eric with What's in the Box, and we are continuing the Texas Horror Lit Fest author interviews. And the event's going to be June 27th, 28th, 10 to 6, both days. Come see us. Today we are chatting with Preston Fassel. Did I say the last name right?
Oh, Fossil, like the watch.
Fossil. Um, I had the unique experience of being at I don't know if it was your first reading, but it was my first reading at Scares That Cares a few years ago. You did Beast of 42nd Street, and you were doing a reading with Mike Enenbach, who's a buddy of mine. And I was
Yeah.
in the back, and I got to watch you read, and then I got to watch Mike do his performative read. And so that was my introduction to you. And also the moniker of best dressed at Scares, you wore that well.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
so I'm excited to see that you're going to be here. I know you planned to be at a couple of the Texas Author Cons and had to miss some for whatever reasons, but it's really exciting to know that you're going to be at Texas Horror Lit Fest.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it and I'm really looking forward to it. I've had so much going on the past couple of years. I've had to reschedule a lot of my travel, but with this being right in our own backyard now and with things finally having settled down a little bit for me, I'm real excited to come back and reconnect with folks and meet some folks for the first time and just have a really fun experience.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be cool to see returning faces and new faces. Um, let's get the questions out of the way. First one we always start with is Freddie, Michael, or Jason.
Oh, Jason. Uh, I've got a lot of affection projected onto the character.
Hmm.
Anybody who has read my writing or read interviews with me knows that I did not necessarily have the, come on, sweetie, did not necessarily have the absolute best upbringing or formative childhood years. And so to see the Friday the 13th movies when I was a little bit older. For some reason, the video stores that I went to in Oklahoma as a teenager didn't really carry franchise horror. They were the kind of places where you could get like some 1970s underground, like sleazy exploitation film really easily, like Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers, but
Hmm.
they didn't have Friday the 13th. Go figure. But I first saw those movies when I was in college, and it was kind of revelatory to me because I was like, Jason Voorhees is a abused child, is a traumatized child who has sort of transformed into this burlesque of adulthood and is using this opportunity now to express this rage and this frustration and this confusion over his place in the world as a result of everything that he's been through. And he kind of became almost this Jungian archetype for me. And so I probably project more onto the Jason Voorhees character than a lot of other people do, but that is why he and the Friday the 13th films have a special place for me. Are they the best? No, that's Nightmare on Elm Street, probably.
Yeah,
Is
I
he
know.
the is he the scariest? That's Michael Myers, probably. But in terms of the character that I can like enjoy some like dark identification with and root for, and who, quite frankly, I feel has the coolest look. That's Jason Voorhees.
Yeah, I'm 100% Team Jason. I think beginning to end, it's the best franchise. Um, there's too many hiccups in the Halloween. And for some reason, I think a lot of people are this way. You either connected with Michael or Jason, and then you kind of picked your path. And I definitely connected with Jason at a very early age. I remember sneaking part two, little clips off of like HBO or TMC at the time when I was
Yeah.
way too young to be watching it. And, listening one ear to make sure my parents were coming and glued to that ending of Friday the 13th part two and really having that imprint on me. I'm a huge Jason fanatic, but you're right. I think if we sat down and made a top 10 list, you'd easily find Nightmare on Elm Street and probably Dream Warriors in that top 10. But then I look at the rest of the Nightmare movies and I think, well, some of them have highlights, but they're not overall. I don't know if I enjoy that character or that franchise as much as I do the Jason stuff. Um, so yeah, I'm 100% with you on that one. And that's probably the deepest explanation we've ever gotten. Usually it's just they enjoy, they haven't looked past that. They haven't actually done like a deep dive into why they like it. They just pick their characters. Um, my second one is, do you have a favorite cryptid or creature within books or movies?
That is a tough one because I'm not really a monster or cryptid person. I cast no shade. I cast no aspersions. If that is your subgenre, if you're like super into Mothman or Jersey Devil, then Godspeed, more power to you. There's
Hmm.
stuff that I enjoy in horror that probably a lot of other people don't, but I've just never really connected. Probably it's going to be an easy answer, but I'd have to say Bigfoot, and that is because I'm from Texas. I went to school in Texas, and there is like a big Bigfoot culture here. And when I was going to college, every year there was this collective, I've forgotten their name, but it was mostly retired guys. And some of them were very wealthy. Some of them were actually like retired oil industry dudes. And they had pumped an insane amount of money into forming this Bigfoot hunting organization. And I mean, they would be there at college career fair day, like in between, Dunder Mifflin and Wendy's. I'm just going to pull
Hmm.
that out of my ass. But I mean, they were there with like, actual businesses trying to recruit college students leaving college into joining their Bigfoot hunting endeavors. And they had parabolic microphones, they had infrared goggles, night vision goggles. Like they were really putting their own money into this and they were well financed. And every year they were there to try and recruit people. And they had a whole cosmology figured out that Bigfoot is a undiscovered North American species of great ape that is on the brink of extinction and is an endangered species now. And they wanted to make contact with him, and they believed that these were a species of great ape that had a higher level of intelligence, closer to Homo sapiens, and that contact might even be possible. They had talked about, like sign language, like Coco, and like trying to talk to
Hmm.
Bigfoot. So you don't get many experiences like that. And so just because of the weird concurrence of Bigfoots with my life, last year too, a script that I co-wrote got adapted into a movie, and they shot it out in Oklahoma up in Broken Bow. And Texas has Buc-ee's,
Hmm.
and this part of Oklahoma has Gas Squatch.
Oh,
And
cool.
for any Texas listeners or viewers, take Buc-ee's, replace the beaver with Bigfoot, and you've got a good idea of what this place is. The
That's
place
awesome.
is the place I think is also maybe a tax write-off for the owner's classic car collection because the restaurant area is shaped like a donut, and the tables and chairs where you eat are the donut hole. And then the donut itself, you're surrounded by authentic, fully restored vintage cars
That
in
sounds
the
awesome.
yeah, so you've got all this Bigfoot stuff, you've got classic cars. They've got a diner there, like a full service diner that is actually like Denny's IHOP quality. My wife is born and raised in the South, and she places a very high premium on the idea of the Southern breakfast. And she says the gas squatch passes her test with like flying colors. And so just because of these weird occurrences of Bigfoot in my life, I guess I would have to say by default it's Bigfoot.
Very cool. And as I've noticed over the last, I know is there's always been a big Bigfoot culture, but it feels like over the last 10 years, we've had an explosion of conventions and sighting parties and just a whole bunch of different things of people really pushing the Bigfoot mythos and attempting to either catch sight of one or I guess even crazier catch one. So yeah, no, I think Bigfoot's gonna probably be the most popular with everyone because it's one of those characters or creatures that we've grown up with, you know. It's not regional and you can pretty much pick the fact that Texas has it, but we know Washington State has got it, and so California's supposedly got some, and Oklahoma and Louisiana, and we can really go over to the East Coast. And I'm sure we'll find a couple places there, and I think that's kind of an interesting phenomenon that we have with those creatures. And then this last question is there a specific book or an author or maybe a series that kind of got you into wanting to be a horror writer?
Oh gosh, yeah, it's Stephen King's The Shining. So when I was 13 years old, I was with my mom at the drugstore. This would have been Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, mid to late 90s. And at the back of the drugstore, they used to have wire racks with the paperback books on it,
Hmm.
right there by the pharmacy counter. And I remember looking at this rack of these Stephen King paperbacks that they reissued in the 90s, and they had these kind of embossed covers. They'd be solid black. They'd have a color bar at the top with Stephen King's name, and then they'd have some like monocolor artistic rendering. Like I remember Christine, it was red tire tracks that look like bloody tire tracks, but also kind of form like a skeleton and a skull. And then the one that I saw that day was The Shining, and it was Danny's silhouette in black with like this golden yellow sunburst around him. And I was familiar with the movie because of references to it in stuff growing up, and my mom telling me, well, that's a nod to The Shining. Like, of course, by this point, I had seen the Simpsons Shinning episode. I'd seen the
Hmm.
episode of Rocko's Modern Life where Heifer gets a job as a security guard and they're aping The Shining. So I was like aware of this movie and aware of this thing called The Shining, but I'd never read the book. I'd never seen the movie. And I'm looking at this thing, and my mom comes over to me and she says, well, you're a teenager now, and it is time for you to start getting into more age appropriate material. And she says, I've seen the movie, I've read Stephen King books, I have an idea of the content of this. And if you're serious about reading it, and if you're serious about starting to read grown up books, then I will buy this for you. And so she did, and I read it and I loved it. And she let me see the Jack Nicholson movie, and I ended up doing my seventh grade book report on The Shining. And I got extra credit because I came in dressed as Jack Torrance in a Pendleton shirt and a really bad Dracula wig that my mom helped me to turn into an ad hoc Jack Nicholson wig. And I got permission from my teacher to bring in a mallet because, in the book, he's got the roquet mallet instead of the
Hmm.
axe. I always knew I wanted to be a writer. From the time I was in first grade, I've known that I had wanted to be a writer. And then reading The Shining really sparked my imagination about writing a horror story. And I've never exclusively wanted to just be a horror writer, but before I read The Shining, the idea of writing a horror story myself had never occurred to me. And so that is what really added that to sort of my aspirational goals. Prior to that, it had just been this really nebulous idea I want to write. And that was sort of the beginning of weaving more horror ideas into the stories that I was thinking about every day. I used to read scary books as a kid, like Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I love the Goosebumps books. I read every single Goosebumps book up to a certain point, except for the Monster Blood and Slappy the Dummy books. Those just really weren't my favorite. But horror reading had always been part of my DNA. But reading The Shining, that's where the idea started to occur to me that maybe one of these days you're going to tell your own horror story too.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and that's a great one to start with. I'm not a huge Stephen King guy, but I will, die on the hill that The Shining is probably one of his best works. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, no, that's really cool. And you just said something that I find interesting, and also I think that a lot of us indie horror writers are we kind of echo the same sentence, which is we're not primarily looking just to write horror. We kind of like to write all these different things, and maybe sometimes, like in my case, I always say everything is horror. So even if I am writing something that might be more romantic, or maybe I'm focusing on a western or something, there will always be elements of horror. But I think that's the cool thing about indie horror itself, the community, is that you'll find so many different interconnecting subgenres and themes and simply non traditional horror ideas within those books that you're finding at these tables at these events. Um, and I noticed your newest one, or not your newest one, but the one I referenced earlier, Beasts of 42nd Street. It's getting a reprint, right? It's coming out.
Yes, it is technically my newest one because this is coming out from Encyclopocalypse, which is the press run by Mark Miller, who
Hmm.
used to be Clive Barker's producer back in the 90s when there was a lot more Clive Barker film adaptations being made. And he runs this press now, Encyclopocalypse. They are a kind of hybrid press. They do audiobooks as well as print books. And the original iteration of Beast of 42nd Street came out through Cemetery Dance back in 2023. It had a very fraught road to publication. Uh, back in 2018. Do we have time for this? I don't want to monopolize you or your listeners'
Oh, no, no,
time.
I
So,
think we do. We have time until this little thing ticks off and says we don't.
okay,
So we're good.
fantastic. Okay, and for anybody listening, if you're getting annoyed or anything, I'm sorry. I can't talk, I know. But if you're interested in like the genetic criticism here and the history of the project, so I published a book called Our Lady of the Inferno in 2018, and that was my debut novel. Fangoria put it out when they briefly had a literary imprint, and it did really well for itself. Fangoria was happy with the sales. I got an IPPY award. I got to go to New York and go to Copacabana for the ceremony. That was really cool. And afterwards, Fangoria says, "Well, of course, we want another book from you now." And they says, "We're not going to put any kind of guardrails on you. We want you to write the kind of book that you want to write. Whatever horror story you give to us, we are going to publish."
Hmm.
And after I had read The Shining, going back to the last question, I had really gotten into these 70s and 80s, like transgressive underground horror, like the splatter punks, people like Poppy Z. Bright, early Clive Barker, George R. R. Martin before he went into Game of Thrones, and he did like Meat House Man, Joe Lansdale. And so the thought had occurred to me, Our Lady of the Inferno is ultimately kind of an uplifting horror story. It's I think one of the few horror books that you could honestly call life affirming that has come out of the past couple of years. And I wanted to do something a bit different. I wanted to do something that was in dialogue with the really transgressive stuff that I was reading in high school. And this was also around the time that Gamergate was happening, and just we were really getting some of our first glimpses at quite how ugly the internet could get and how that could bleed over into the
Hmm.
real world and actually have an appreciable impact on people's lives. And 42nd Street in the 1970s was such this incredibly diverse place, but it was also a very toxic and destructive place. And that reminds me of the internet. And so the idea had occurred to me to write this very gritty, very intentionally upsetting 1970s fable about toxic fandom as told through the lens of the movie theaters on 42nd Street and the films that played there, but it would really be a story about the toxic fandom of the internet age. And they told me I could go as dark as I wanted to, and so I did. And they were happy with it. It was going to get published, and then COVID happened, and Fangoria got sold. They moved operations to Georgia, and the new owner shuttered the literary imprint, and that was that. And I eventually got the rights to the book back. And I started shopping it around, and I thought to myself, this is a easy sell. This was going to be a Fangoria book. It is the pseudo prequel to Lady of the Inferno. It takes place in like the same universe, the same
Hmm.
movie theater that's in Central, and Lady of the Inferno is also the movie theater in Beast of 42nd Street. And so I thought, this is a sure thing. And about 25 different places rejected it. And there was a consistent response in those rejections, and it was, we like this. We think it's a good book. We don't think it's a bad book. But the content of it and the tone of it is not something that we want to touch with a 10-foot pole. I wish I had saved this one rejection letter because it was just really great, the phrasing they used. It was something along the lines of, it's too tonally upsetting. What was it? Yeah, that was the consistent feedback was the
Yeah.
tone. The tone is upsetting. And it's one of these things where you see like an R rating on a movie and it says for like tone or for like content, and they don't really explicitly say like for violence or for sex, it is just tone. And I had kind of accidentally stumbled into that. And because there is one really violent scene in the entire book. A lot of the book is people discussing stuff or going places or watching movies. I kind of modeled it on the Maltese Falcon. I wanted to do a neo-noir against the backdrop of a horror story, and so it
Hmm.
is a mystery. But it's not a really violent book. It's not a really sexual book, but the tone was upsetting to people. And finally, what happened was I met Brian Keene at Scares the Care, and he and I had gotten to talking, and Brian put me in touch with a guy named Kevin Lucia, who at the time was the brand new acquisitions editor at Cemetery Dance. and he was really looking to come onto the scene with a splash and do something unique and provocative. And so the idea of publishing Beasts to 42nd Street was very appealing to him. Uh, Around all of this, against the backdrop of this, Donald Trump gets elected, the political temperature of the country kind of shifts. The Unite the Right rally had happened out in Virginia. And the reason I bring all of this up is because I'm Jewish, and originally so was the protagonist of this book. And one of the things that I had sought to do with this was to kind of play around with the idea of the anti-hero protagonist and characters like Travis Bickle or Walter White or Tony Soprano or even Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, where
Hmm.
you've taken this personality who, if you met this guy in real life, you would probably be shit scared of him and you would cross the street to avoid having to deal with him. And, Walter White is cool to watch on TV, but God forbid you ever found yourself in a situation where you were Jesse Pinkman to him. And there's this consistent recurring thing with these characters, and this happens to me too. This is why I was interested in doing this. Even though you wouldn't want to meet these people in real life, you still love them as fictional characters and you still root for them. And a part of you still wants to see them succeed. And David Chase brought this up about why you don't see Tony Soprano die at the end of The Sopranos. He says, I thought that it was perverse that fans had spent 6 seasons rooting for him and then wanted to see him get a bullet in the back of his head and end the show face down in a pile of onion rings. But as a fan and as a writer, I understand that. I understand that when you have a character who is your focal character and you're spending all this time with them, that your natural human empathy is going to kick in and you're going to start identifying with them, maybe against your own better judgments. I'm watching Peaky Blinders right now, and damn
Hmm.
if I'm not rooting for Tommy. I love Arthur Shelby, and Arthur Shelby is like 2 IQ points away from being like a feral animal who will
Yeah, for
literally
sure.
yeah, but you still root for him. And
Hmm.
so I'd wanted to do this experiment with Beasts of 42nd Streets to see how vile can I make a protagonist and how bad can I take him and what can I have him do, but people will still be rooting for him. Or conversely, can I do something like Taxi Driver where you don't end up rooting for him? And I was curious to see what I could achieve with this. And with everything that was going on at the time, I wasn't sure if it was the best thing if this guy was also Jewish. And his Jewishness is a very big part of the character because I had also taken a lot of elements from my own life in order to conceptualize this guy. I really came up with him as sort of my shadow self. I based him partially on me at a really bad time in my life because I was working as a theater projectionist. I was going to college full time. My mother had been diagnosed with leukemia and was in quarantine at MD Anderson in Houston. It was very touch and go on whether or not she was going to make it. Thankfully, she did, and she's still with us. But at the time, there was a really real possibility that I was going to lose my mom in my early 20s. I had just gone through a pretty bad breakup. It was one of these situations
Like
where,
a perfect storm.
yeah, and it was the kind of breakup too that doesn't lend itself to easy emotional catharsis because it was a
Hmm.
case of we just weren't right for one another. It was an unusually mature breakup for a couple of people in their 20s where we realized like we had different life paths in front of us and we loved one another, but that wasn't enough to really build a relationship on. And so we amicably broke up. And that was just something that was really eating at me. And basically, I was spending all my time either going to school, dealing with the hospital and issues with insurance and visiting my mom, or working as a projectionist at Cinemark. And I really stopped eating a lot and I lost a lot of weight. And I legitimately was doing the Travis Bickle, like 50 push-ups every day. I had broken down a theater standee and turned it into like this cardboard exercise mat for myself up in the projector booth. And it was just a really dark, unpleasant period in my life. And so I drew a lot from that for this character. And because I was basing him so much on me, I really wanted to weave my own Jewishness and those cultural references and make that a part of the DNA of the story and the character. And the time comes to show this manuscript to Kevin for potential publication at Cemetery Dance. And something just really gnawed at me and I said to myself, you can't do that right now and it would not be a good look and it would maybe be doing more harm than good. And so I went back and I retooled the character and I took out all those references and I made him a New York Polish Catholic because I have that in my family as well. And so I felt that it was appropriate for me to pull from that and to take those frames of references, even if it wouldn't necessarily be so intimate and personal to me. And Beast came out. It had a really great run through Cemetery Dance. It had its limited run there that sold out, which I was really happy about.
Hmm.
And then October 7th happened. And October 7th had a very negative effect on a lot of things, a lot of people. It feels really shitty to say it that way. It feels like it's watering down what it was. I mean, if you're Jewish, 10/7 was your 9/11.
Hmm.
And in the same way that I saw there being this big backlash against Muslim Americans in the aftermath of 9/11, there's been a tremendous backlash against Jewish Americans following 10/7. And people online can scream until they're blue in the face that, oh, we don't hate Jews, we hate Zionists. Well, ask those people what a Zionist is, and every single one of them is going to give you a different answer. The three guys who followed me out to my car from the North Park Mall Macy's did not know what my political affiliation was. They saw Star of David and they started chanting death to the Jews, death to the nation Israel, and followed me out to my car. They didn't bother to stop to ask me what my political opinion was. People on Twitter have not bothered to ask what my political opinion is. I've been labeled a bloodthirsty, genocide loving Zionist across social media. I don't delete a lot of my social media. You can go back and look through my social media. You are not going to see a lot or really any pro-Israel sentiments in that. You're going to see a lot of, I think it's wrong to gang rape and kill women. You're going to see a lot of, I think that it's wrong to attack civilian targets in a war. You're going to see a lot of, we need to separate the people of Israel from the politics of Israel, the same way that we can separate the people of the United States from the politics of Donald Trump. But you're not going to see any of this frothing at the mouth. Benjamin Netanyahu is secular Jesus, blah blah blah. That's not my brand. That's not me. That's not what I
Hmm.
think or feel or believe. But the fact that I was Jewish and the fact that I was not chanting down with Israel along with everybody else was enough to get me labeled a genocide-loving, baby-hating, anti-Arab, Islamophobic, what have you. And I am far from the only Jewish person in the horror scene to have this experience. I think I'm far from the only Jewish person in the entertainment world to have this experience because I'm sorry, the average person on social media is not smart enough to differentiate between Israelis, Jews, and Zionists. They are all the same in this very poisonous mental miasma. And so it suddenly became a different matter for me whether or not the protagonist of this book was Jewish. And he's bad. He's a really bad guy. But going back to something we said a minute ago, so is Walter White, so is Tony Soprano, so is Darth Vader and the Joker and all of these other really toxic characters. But they're also iconic characters. They're the characters that we do root for. And representation does matter, even if that representation is maybe bad. And if you go back and look at the litany of Jewish villains throughout entertainment history, a lot of the times they're not being written by Jews. You've got Shylock, I think, is probably the most famous example of a Jewish villain, and he's written by the least Jewish person you can conceptualize. William Shakespeare, in all likelihood, never actually even met a Jewish person because they had all been exiled from England before he was born, and we weren't welcomed back until, around the time he was dead.
Yeah.
So, this is an iconic Jewish villain written by a very non-Jewish person. And you go back through the big Jewish villains of literary history, of film history, it's the same pattern. What is it? Uriah Heep and Charles Dickens, another one, Oliver Twist. You've got all of these very famous Jewish villains not written by Jewish authors, and they all tend to be very problematic. And so the thought had occurred to me in this period where we need Jewish representation more than ever, maybe negative representation is a good thing too. And so I really started to think about that. And I've got a really positive relationship with Mark Miller at Encyclopocalypse. He's helped me out in more ways than I can elaborate on a podcast. And with the rights being back with me after Cemetery Dance, I went to Mark and I says, "Hey, I got this idea." And Mark heard me out and he says, "I think that's great." He was incredibly supportive of it. He immediately said, "Let's do this." And so I went back and I re-Judaified Beasts of 42nd Street. And I bounced around what to call this, like author's preferred text or like author's cut. And it occurred to me for a book that's very much about exploitation cinema and grindhouse culture, and that is sort of a neo-noir for the Vinegar Syndrome crowd. Let's treat it like a DVD reissue. And let's treat it like this is this old 70s exploitation movie that has been finally restored and remastered. And so we decided this is Beast of 42nd Street restored and remastered.
That's cool.
And yeah, and so that is what will be coming out in July.
Okay, so you'll have it in is there any chance you'll have copies at the event?
I will. Mark was really cool about this. He got some copies printed up beforehand. I've got a crate of paperbacks that have been going to the press and to critics. And then also I've got several copies set aside that'll be special pre-release copies that are only available direct from me until July 14th.
Okay, that's awesome. Very cool. What else can we expect at your table?
So there'll be Beasts, and there will be Lady of the Inferno, my very first book,
Mhm.
and then there will be my nonfiction book Landis, the story of a real man on 42nd Street, which is my biography of Sleeves at Express magazine founder Bill Landis, who, if you have read anything about 70s exploitation cinema or the 1980s underground New York art scene, you have probably come across Bill's writing or Bill himself or people who were inspired by Bill.
Very cool. Um, yeah, I'm getting the flashing light telling me that we need to wrap it up because I'm too cheap to get the full Zoom package. So, but I really enjoyed this. This was amazing, and
Well,
the
this
deep
was
dive
wonderful.
into beasts. That's cool.
Uh,
I didn't know that origin story, and so to hear it and to witness you read it because, like I said, we came in, you read a section of it. I'm like, man, this is pretty cool. Didn't know what was going on to be honest with you at the time, but when you then get to pick up the book and see what it's about and kind of get a vibe of what's going on, it's it was one of those, and the cover was so graphic that I thought, this is a pretty cool book. But to hear that this new, you know, original reworking of it, I'm very excited to see, how it does and to grab a copy and check it out. So, um, again, this is going to be at Texas Horror Lit Fest in Irving, Texas, June 27th through 28th. Authors will be there 10 to 6 both days. It's a free event, but you get a ticket and it can enter you into some drawings and let us know that you're planning on coming. So we have an idea of what to have going. There's going to be panels and there's going to be a whole bunch of really awesome horror, fantasy, science fiction authors looking to show you off some new stuff. So I hope we see you there. And thanks for jumping on and chatting with me.
Thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Take it easy.